Um, Violence is the new Republican grift. Basically, Republicans know that more death enhances their power, and the more death that's popping up, the more the Republicans are adoring it. Now, sometimes when you hear a person's name, you sometimes have to research that person's name to get a general idea of how they are. So Carl Schmitt was a German legal philosopher and a political theorist. He was a critic of democracy and liberalism, and he was a rabid anti-Semite who served as the chief legal advisor to the Nazis in the Third Reich. Now, one of the main arguments he had was that a leader, the sovereign who has been given legitimacy and power by the people, preferably homogeneous, can decide to create a state of exception in response to some type of crisis. Now, in essence, a leader can use the law or work outside of it as he sees fit in the interest of the public good as he defines it. Schmidt also believed that violence was the basic essence of politics and power, and that political decision-making should be structured by the distinction between friend and enemy, meaning the other. Now, for obvious reasons, Schmidt's theories about a state of exception, violence, totalitarianism, and nationalism were highly appealing for the Nazis and other such anti-democratic and illiberal movements and leaders. Excuse me. Now, Steve Bannon, who was Trump's former advisor and a January 6th Klan rioter and insurrectionist, a self-described Leninist who is also a neo-fascist that wants to tear down the existing order, most certainly has a deep familiarity with Carl Schmitt. Michael Flynn, the now disgraced former United States Army general, a key figure in the January 6th Klan attack and an expert in counterinsurgency and psychological operations and regime change, most certainly knows about Carl Schmitt's work and theories. Now, the members of the right-wing brain trust that inhabit such places as the Federalist Society, the Claremont Institute, and the various other think tanks, research institutes, and Cook-founded university departments and professorships, who are doing the intellectual and legal work of undermining America's multiracial, pluralist democracy, most certainly also know Carl Schmitt and who he is, at least by name. Now, most Republican and other right-wing elected officials and members of the political class and media machine likely do not know who Carl Schmitt is, or they don't even know his name. That is most certainly true of Donald Trump, a man who is proudly ignorant and does not read at all. But it is almost certain that the average Republican voter and other rank-and-file members of the maggot movement do not know who Carl Schmitt is either. But that doesn't matter because, the Republicans don't read anyway. But that does not matter because they are most certainly compelled to embrace Schmitt's arguments in favor of violence against some type of enemy, such as black and brown people, Muslims, the LGBTQ community, Democrats, liberals, progressives, and others who they deem to not be real Americans, even though not one Republican's a real American anyway. But in all violence, in its many forms, which includes random violence, terrorism, hate crimes, intimidation, and vigilantism, it's central to the Republican fascist and the larger right and conservative movements' projects to end America's multiracial pluralistic democracy by gutting the rule of law and the country's democratic and other societal institutions. Trump's greatest appeal is how he gives his followers and others in the maggot movement's orbit permission to be their worst, true, horrible selves. Yep, that's what happened when Trump became squatter in 2017. Anybody that supported him, he let them be their. He let out the worst in all of them. The violence bonds members of a social group together. This is especially true of political personality cults such as the Trump maggot movement. Healthy democracies discourage and outlaw political violence because it is anti-ethical to normal politics, with its rules-based deliberation and collective decision-making and other ways of attempting to be legitimate sources of authority among the governed. Now, the Klan attack on January 6th was part of a much larger strategy of using violence, threats, and intimidation to undermine American democracy and to create a space for Trump GOP fascist maggot movement and the larger right to expand their power and influence. And to that point, the Republican Party and its voters have not disavowed political violence as seen on January 6th and beyond. In fact, public opinion polls and other research show the opposite. A significant percentage of today's Republican voters increasingly see right-wing political violence up to and including a Klan attack to remove President Biden from office and or as a sustained insurgency our second civil war as legitimate means of getting and keeping themselves in political power. Now, the Republican-controlled legislature and state houses are continuing to pass laws that encourage and make it legal for drivers to run over protesters, as applied in the red state America. This legal violence can generally be used to a maximum effect against black and brown people and others who are deemed to be un-American because they are too woke. And if you ask a Republican what the word woke means, they can't fucking define it. Now, members of the Democrats or others that are not sufficiently patriotic because they dare to exercise their civil rights, such as free speech and freedom of assembly. Now, the Republican legislators in Texas are creating a type of militia that will be empowered to patrol the southern border. Now, if created, members of this militia would be granted immunity from civil or criminal prosecution. Given how Texas has historically treated Hispanics and Latinos and other non-whites, human rights organizations have warned that these militias will be a de facto death squad. Trump continues to valorize the January 6 terrorists as heroes and political prisoners, even though they're not. They are victims of the deep. He claims that they are victims of the deep state and the Biden administration, which they're not. The Republican lawmakers pushed for national concealed carry and they're trying to expand the stand your ground law, which is a fucking joke. Based on what is known about how the easy access to guns and the encouragement to use them irresponsibly directly correlates to an increase in gun violence, including suicides and mass murder. The American right is trying to create a Hobbesian state of nature where violence and fear of death is everywhere and the rule of law is increasingly meaningless to us. Now, the social psychologists have repeatedly shown that the political decision-making of conservative authoritarians is largely motivated by fear and death anxiety. The Republican Party's opposition to effective gun control is a strategic decision because they know that the more death and more killing from guns and other causes, such as COVID, enhances their power and control over the public world, including support for fascist leader and or other demagogues such as Trump. Now, the Republican Party's and conservative movements' policies are deeply unpopular with the American people, and they know it. Now, thus, the Republican fascists and the larger right and conservative movement have increasingly concluded that balance is necessary and required and legitimate way for them to impose their will on the American people in the name of defending traditional values and real America. Ask them what real America is, and they can't really tell you an answer, which is not a subtle call for white America and white Christianity. Now, to this end, the Republican fascists and conservatives and the larger white right, they possess a deep attraction to and affinity for vigilante and other extra-legal and illegal violence, as committed most recently by the likes of Daniel Perry, who choked a mentally ill homeless black man to death on a New York subway train. Kyle Murderhouse, also known as the Kenosha Kid, George Zimmerman, who killed a black teenager, Trayvon Martin, for the crime of walking home and refusing to comply with the wannabe cop's orders, and too many others. Now, police officers who kill unarmed and otherwise vulnerable black and brown people are also valorized by the American right wing. Now, ultimately, the right-wing vigilantism and other violent acts are encouraged by the vast right-wing machine that makes such people into stars and heroes and then lavishes them with money. At the New York Times, Jamel Bowie issues a warning about the American right wing's increasing bloodlust for vigilante violence in the age of Trump and the country's worsening democracy crisis. It's the same fucking language and the same tropes, the same ideals. In listening to conservative fans of Murder House, Perry, and Penny, you would never know that there were actual people on the other side of these confrontations. You would never know that those people were in life entitled to the protection of the law that they are, in death entitled to a full account of the last moments of their lives, with legal responsibility for the men who killed them, if that's what a jury decides upon. But what you would know is that some Americans are heroes and law-abiding citizens, and others are not. You would know that those Americans get the benefit of the doubt, and you would learn that to be seen as a problem by one of those law-abiding citizens is to be in jeopardy and even potentially to forfeit your claim to life. We see this in the worst of the discourse around Neely, who is framed not as a citizen with rights worth respecting, but as a dangerous nuisance who deserved that fate. One last point, the Satanists called Penny a good Samaritan, and we also saw that language used in defense of Murder House during his trial. Now, as media watchdog group Media Matters reports, there is a political machine that protects, funds, and elevates these right-wing vigilantes to hero and cult status. With this wave of promotion, including personal donations from right-wing commentators Tim Pool, Candace Owens, and Tammy Bruce, Penny's defense fund has raised over $2 million on Give Send Go, which is a Christian fundraising site previously used by January 6 Klan rioters. Now, Penny is far from the first vigilante killer to receive the full backing of conservative media. After Kyle Murder House shot 3 people and killing two at an August 2020 Black Lives Matter protest in Kenosha, Wisconsin, the right-wing media figures similarly jumped to his defense, soliciting donations and painting him as a victim who engaged in justified self-defense, even though he murdered 2 people that were not armed. So that wasn't self-defense. So Drew Hernandez, a frequent Tucker Carlson guest who has worked at Turning Point USA, Steve Bannon, and InfoWars, even served as a witness for Murder House's defense. Since the Kenosha shooting, Murder House has turned into a conservative icon and used his new platform to advocate for other vigilantes, appearing on Tucker Carlson Tonight in April, before Tucker got murdered. Basically got fired, basically. So basically his show got murdered. Basically his show's not on the air anymore. Murder House and Carlson petitioned Texas Governor Greg Abbott to pardon Daniel Perry, another right-wing media darling, who was found guilty of murdering a Black Lives Matter protester in July of 2020, after prosecutors revealed a history of messages on which he called protesters monkeys and threatened to kill them. That's basically racist in itself right there for what he said. Now, with the campaign of support behind him, Penny has joined the ranks of George Zimmerman, Travis and Gregory McMichael, Andrew Lester, Byron Smith, and various other vigilante patrols and right-wing militias whose extrajudicial violence has been excused by conservative media. Now, the above is reflective of how American society, historically and to the present, has a deep and pathological appetite for violence both at home and abroad. America is truly exceptional in that way as one of the most violent societies on the planet. Now, public health researchers and other experts have shown in great detail how the violence spreads across communities and broader society like a pathogen or virus. But in many ways, it's preventable and can otherwise be contained and treated. Now, today's Republican Party and conservative movement and its forces, they want the American people to be sick and terminally ill with such violence and all the misery and death that they cause. It is that sickness and death which the Republican fascists and the conservatives and the larger right and their forces see as a pathway to unlimited power for all time and their dream nightmare of a new American plutocracy. Now, if you want to research this, and it is true, when you look at what party commits the most violent acts, it's the Republican Party. The Republican Party commits about 90%, if not more, of the violent attacks that we see every day, while the Democrats only commit about 8 to 9% of the attacks, while the Republicans commit 90% or more. So, if you like the video, you can give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King. You can also hit the notification bell so you'll be notified when a new video comes out. You can also leave a comment, let me know what you think. And if you want to support my work even further, you can donate to my Patreon link, which you can find in the About section of YouTube. And for just a little as a few bucks a video or a month, your donation can help go a long way, and thanks for listening.